Welcome, you're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. Today we're talking about Ukraine's judicial reform. A well-functioning probation system is one of the prerequisites for Ukraine's accession to the EU. And the project called PRAVO-Justice promotes greater rule of law in Ukraine in line with European standards. It supports Probation Service of Ukraine through the development of new training programs and introduction of electronic services. To talk more about this, we're joined in the studio today by Randel Barrows. He's an international expert of the EU project PRAVO-Justice. Hello, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, as far as I know, the official law on implementing the probation system in Ukraine was passed in 2015, so basically 4 years ago. But the system itself became operational only in 2017. Why did it take so long?
That's a good question, and probably not one that I'm best placed to answer, but I can explain some aspects of that. There was some reorganization and restructuring of probation, a decision to create a separate agency as opposed to the part of the penitentiary service that it used to be. That was taken into the Ministry of Justice, but now there is an independent probation administration and an independent penitentiary administration, both accountable to and reporting to the Ministry of Justice, but separate entities of their own. And frankly, those kind of reorganizations and restructurings do take time. There's another aspect to the change in Ukraine. There is a desire to demilitarize the system, but that also takes time, if only because, frankly, military terms of service are generally better than civilian ones. So you have to take account of changes to pension arrangements, changes to salary, and so on and so forth. So we're talking large organizations with large numbers of staff, so there's a lot of processes that need to be
comparing to the penitentiary system, which has existed in Ukraine for a long time now. What is the difference between the penitentiary system and the probation system?
Well, in 2000, the number of prisoners in Ukraine was something around 450 per 100,000 population. Now it's down to about 150, 160 per 100,000 population. So most of that shift has been because courts are making more sentences that leave people in the community. And the probation agency is the main way of doing that. In other words, they supervise people who can live relatively normal lives with their families, go to work, support their families, and so on. Of course, serious offenders still need to go to jail, or persistent offenders still need to go to jail. But now the number of people in prison here in Ukraine is not as low as the European average, but it's as low as a number of other countries in Western Europe.
So basically, it looks like the probation system was implemented or started being implemented because of the overload of the penitentiary system. And where is that line when a person can officially be accounted for a rough offender who deserves to go to jail instead of being on probation?
The law is quite clear about the gravity of his offence in relation to what requires a prison sentence and what can be dealt with something less than a prison sentence, if you like. And in Ukraine, it's generally first offenders who would receive probation. And there's been a lot of progress with juveniles as well in relation to keeping them out of institutions. And one of the reasons why it's not about the policy imperative, if you like, or the aim of this development is not just to reduce the number of people in prison.
What is the aim?
The aim is to reduce crime in Ukraine and to make Ukraine a safer place. Well, if you think about some prison conditions mean that a person, and a number of politicians and policymakers have made these comments, that prisons can become colleges of crime. So someone who's only committed a minor offence, if they go to prison, they may well leave prison more likely to commit more offences than before they went in. They may become addicted to drugs whilst in prison, because there are drugs in prison. And so if you can keep someone in the community and manage them, supervise them, help them to overcome the problems that led to the crime in the first place, but ensure that they keep to the requirements of their probation order, then you probably are more likely to have a safer society in the long term. Now, I do understand, if I can just say one, I do understand that if you're the victim of a burglary or a car theft or robbery, you think, I want that person to go to jail. It's a normal response. You feel angry, you want... But if you find out that the person who's done this to you, for example, is a 17-year-old who was regularly abused by his stepfather throughout his childhood, who didn't do very well in school, who got sacked at work or wasn't able to get a job.
Going to jail would even make it worse.
Who was led into crime by an older person, so on and so forth. You start to see the person who's done this not just as a criminal, but as a human being. And it might mean that you think, yeah, okay, if probation is going to reform this person, this is a better option than prison.
But can probation actually reform a person?
Yes, yes. One of the reasons for the EU PRAVO project having a probation component is that it can draw on experts internationally, and those experts bring with them basically an approach which is sometimes called what works, evidence-based ways of doing things that are demonstrated to achieve their right outcomes. So, for example, it may be a simple thing. You and I have both, I assume you have had also higher education, and
yes,
we've learned how to think. Okay, we've simply learned how to process information, how to make reasoned decisions, and so on. And we have one of the things that we do with offenders on probation is called a thinking skills program. And that basically teaches people to think about the consequences of their actions. If I do this, this might be a consequence. And it gets people to stop and think before they act.
Do those people who end up being on probation program come out or enter the program with a record, with an official record of being a criminal or not?
Yes, yes, they would.
They still do.
And that means there are barriers to employment, for example. So there are a number of initiatives in different countries. For example, sometimes in some jurisdictions, the government has offered inducements to employers to employ ex-offenders with some tax breaks and so on. At the same time supporting, it can work. And at the same time supporting the employer, so that the employer's can call the probation officer if there's a problem, and so on.
The probation program that is now being implemented in Ukraine, is it taken from an experience from the European countries, or is it a brand new, freshly comprised
It's a combination. Program? Actually, every country has to find its own solutions to these issues. But the human condition isn't so different in different parts of the world. So most things that would work in country A would work in country B.
Mentality is also very important.
Yes, exactly. So some of the experience that's been brought to Ukraine is European. Actually, some of it's also Canadian. And Canada and my own country, the UK, have been probably taken the most initiatives in relation to development of programs with an evidence base for success. And those are the kinds of things that are being introduced. And the idea is that you assess every individual and say, what are the factors that led to this person committing crime? And how do we tackle those problems?
Perhaps you have already a personal story in mind you would like to share of a successful, let's call it participant of the probation program, who finished the program and finished the program reborn, without a criminal sort of a trace of thought. Yeah,
and it's always interesting to put a story to the facts and stats, isn't it? And to think about real people. I can think of a young man who was convicted for theft from a shop, and that theft was to support a minor drug habit, not a serious drug problem. He went on probation, and it turned out that there were some problems with the family, not just his own attitude, but there was some conflict within the family. So the probation officer became involved with the family, and they also, through an NGO, introduced this young man to some other more positive activities rather than stealing and so on. And step by step, we call it social capital. So, you know, step by step, he felt better about himself, he had a more positive attitude, he took on positive things, and in fact, in the end, he was able to get a job, not a highly paid job, but as a stepping stone. It was a job in a warehouse with a forklift, and they trained him how to drive a forklift truck. So,
how old was the person you're talking about?
He was 18.
And now?
20, yeah. Probably, I think he's maybe not quite 20, but 20.
And he's done with a minor habit of taking drugs.
Yeah, because I think this was just, as the English expression goes, the devil makes work for idle hands. So, you know.
I'm sure that this is not the only story of success that has happened throughout the existence of the probation program. Now, I know that the project, the work of the project is due to end in 2020. What happens after that? Well,
there are some very excellent people in the Ukrainian probation service. They're always polite, they always listen to what we say, but sometimes I think actually they know this already, or they are already ahead of the game in that sense. But there are a number of donors operating in conjunction with the probation service here. The Norwegians have a project here, I mentioned the Canadians. So I think although our project may end in 2020, their support from other countries will not end at that point. But nevertheless, it's clear to me that even if all that support stopped, there are enough ideas, there is enough passion, there's enough belief, enough competence in the probation service here in Ukraine to continue the journey forward. And the only other thing I'd like to say in relation to that is that probation is only one small part of the criminal justice system.
Of course.
The most successful systems appear to be ones where the systems are joined up well. So there's a good understanding between the courts and the probation, prosecutors, and so on, and police, so that they're working in partnership because they all want the same thing. They all want to reduce the rate of crime. Yeah.
And lastly, what would your evaluation of the crime rate in Ukraine would be?
I don't think this is topical in that I know two people recently who've had their wallets or purses stolen in Ukraine, in Kiev.
I've had that happen to me as well.
Yeah, so there are certain types of crime. Now, crime prevention also is because sometimes if you take the opportunity away, then the crime rate falls. And in fact, all the evidence suggests that although the criminal justice system itself has some impact on crime rates, that other factors are much more powerful. So, for example, the rate of employment in society, and the extent to which families are strong, and so on and so forth. But so there are certain crimes, and it does appear as though this wallet or purse stealing is maybe a problem in Kiev at the moment. I don't know whether, I don't have the statistics, but are people warned? You know, when tourists arrive in Kiev, maybe they should be warned there's a gang operating, or there's some prevalence of this kind of crime, and be careful. So there are ways of tackling crime.
In every big capital of a big country, like when you arrive in Paris, you know that you have to be careful with your personal belongings in the underground or in the downtown of Paris. The same thing goes for London and Washington.
It does. Unfortunately, the impression that I have, and all my colleagues from various other European countries have of Ukraine, is that it feels very safe. That's the perception we have. When we walk about, we don't feel threatened, we don't feel there are dark corners particularly, or there are dark corners but they don't feel threatening. So maybe we're a bit too sanguine or a bit too naive about the way we approach it. But yeah, you're right though about all these other cities, of course.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for this beautiful conversation. That was Randel Barrows. He's an international expert of the EU project PRAVO-Justice. Thank you so much for watching UATV. Stay tuned for more.